There's always that one final face-off in anime that really becomes hard to forget just because of how intense some of these anime battles can be. So let's talk about some of them in this video. Be warned, major spoilers ahead. In Naruto's big fight against Sasuke, Masashi Kishimoto threw in every possible chakra move he could in the battle. The 4th Great Ninja War had several titanic battles, but even they paled in comparison to the conclusion of Naruto Uzumaki and Sasuke Uchiha's joint character arcs. Through all of Shippuden, this fight probably had the best animation. They pulled out all the stops for this one and made it as epic and destructive as they could. The combat choreography has always been one of the best things about Naruto, but this was something else. Unlike most anime battles, this one was fought between two characters who were still, at the end of the day, best friends. Their hesitance in fighting each other yet having unshakable ideals that made conflict inevitable added a layer of emotional depth to their battle that only made fans more invested in its outcome. Even now, years after, there's still debate on who really won, but only one of them had achieved their goal by its conclusion. To save his brother, Edward Elric went against beings whose abilities were almost close to the divine. Near the end of the series, we see this happen when Edward Elric goes against Father and the Homunculi, who had become a far greater threat than what Edward could handle. But we all know that one anime cliche. He managed to save the day because all the friends he had made along the way, and that did help in ending the whole Doomsday plot. But what followed after was a display of alchemic ability we had never seen from Edward before. And in this fight where Father had just lost his omnipotent status, it was quite satisfying to see Edward defeat him with a series of blows that eventually sent him back to the truth for some much deserved judgment. From the very beginning, we were made aware of what kind of future there was for the Edge Runners, but that didn't stop David Martinez from joining the ranks of Night City's most violent mercenary groups. David's rise in the ranks of the underworld was aided by his reckless use of cyberkinetic implants, and when the consequences of his choices finally came in the form of cyberpsychosis, David refused to go down that easily. Eventually in the series, David is finally confronted by the cyberpunk legend Atom Smasher, and this final fight between the two becomes the most memorable mainly because of the tragedy of it all. A battle that makes you cry can actually be hard to forget. Castlevania's final season was honestly kinda tame until we got to this final battle. For the vampire hunting trio of Trevor, Sypha, and Alucard, it really wasn't that hard for them to get rid of the usual vampires, ghouls, and whatever else lurked in the dark. But when there was news of Dracula possibly reviving, many powerful vampires from all over the world showed up to witness this resurrection. Of course our trio was up to the task, and we were really reminded of what they were actually capable of. But the real twist in their journey was that Varney, a vampire we all had assumed to be a minor character, turned out to be the literal manifestation of death. This fight was to prevent Dracula's resurrection, but Trevor in this battle was faced with a titan-sized death, and the struggle was to defeat him in this colossal form. Trevor's final boss fight with death was a bit of a reference to the Castlevania video games, where the entity was often an enemy of the Belmont family. Throughout the series, we were unable to see Gon show us any actual feat or Nen ability, but even so, those that he met on his adventures would tell us about the power within him. At this point, we were anticipating the moment where Gon's hidden abilities were unleashed, and fortunately, it happened before Yoshihiro Togashi went on hiatus. This memorable fight was a glimpse of Gon's abilities as he gave Neferpitou a very deserved beating. Full of rage and an intent to kill, for the first time, we see the extent of what the adult Gon would be capable of. All to avenge Kite, adult Gon became one of the most powerful characters in Hunter x Hunter. In this fight, he defeated one of the strongest Chimera ants, and although Neferpitou was mostly concerned with defeating him for Meruem's sake, her energy would have been better spent protecting herself since she was the only target on Gon's mind. And Gon's frightening rage was enough to make their battle unforgettable. I've decided to include another Hunter x Hunter one because this series wasn't exactly known for particularly flashy battles. So when we get those, of course they become ones hard to forget. The final confrontation between the Chimera Ant King and the Hunter Association's 12th chairman was for the very fate of humanity. The stakes were high in this fight, and the slightest misstep could only further the chances of a greater disaster waiting to happen. Defeating Meruem was basically impossible, and when all the other weapons failed, Netero never planned on fighting fair as he unleashed a chemical weapon especially effective against Meruem. Only that it sadly came at the cost of his own life. Sure, Aaron's genocide arc was surprising, But when the scouts decided to go against him, it was a little bit of a concern because they had to face off against an army of colossal titans and the founding titan on top of it all. I think it's safe to say the odds were stacked against them. The conclusion of this fight was probably one of the most controversial in manga history. Some liked it and praised Hajime Isayama for it, while others hated it to the point they started to hate the entire series itself. Well, you can't please everyone, and there's one thing that I can say for sure. There isn't a series quite like Attack on Titan, and the bar has been set so high that it may be difficult for future creators to actually top something like this masterpiece. Since the beginning of the anime, Mob has been fearful and hesitant of his powers, making him unable to accept himself. At the end of Season 3, Mob finally faces the enemy that literally has actually been himself all along. By the end of this fight, Mob is able to regain control of himself, but there is another thing that is returned to him as a result of the fight, and that is his emotions. The tears that he sheds after this fight are a much needed release of the feelings Mob had been holding back this whole time. This final battle is not only memorable because of how Mob faces his toughest enemy yet, but also because with this fight, he regains his identity and the self that he had buried and lost along the way. Dio had a grand old time terrorizing the Joestar family, but his luck ran out when he provoked the Stardust Crusaders. That really was a beehive he shouldn't have been poking around in. This villain was hard to track down, but what was more of a challenge was his abilities. It took the sacrifice of Noriaki Kakyoin to finally figure that out, and his sacrifice wasn't in vain. Because without this information, defeating the immortal vampire would have been even more impossible. The fight between the two was a series of ingenious methods they were using to try and outwit each other. And let's not forget about the popular which has already made this one of the most iconic and unforgettable fights. But still, the actual battle is definitely a whole different viewing experience. More than just a meme, I'd say. A gory and disturbing tale was strangely expected to have a happy ending because of how the narrative was for a future where devilmen and humans would be able to live in harmony. But all of that goes out the window as near the end of the series, it wasn't only Akira's identity being revealed to the world that was catastrophic. The battle between Akira and Satan was probably one of the most destructive and violent battles in all of anime. Both were overpowered and the world was already in the midst of a collapse. The anime itself leaves an impression on the viewer, but if this fight isn't one of the most horrific battles in anime, then I don't know what is. I know I couldn't include all of the ones I probably missed, but let me know which ones you think should have made the list. I'm probably missing an important one from Dragon Ball, aren't I? But strange, I can't seem to remember. Maybe liking and subscribing would jog my memory? But if you made it to the end of the video, thanks for watching. We really appreciate it.